In any case, I don't mind doing this type interview or talk because, if I can inspire younger generations
That's
of
what we're-
architects
that's
or
what we're
your
after.
audience,
Yeah.
somebody, or women, I got a good response because for women also it's not that common. And I was always asking myself why.
Welcome into today's show. On today's show, little bit different format today, and Mikey, you and I just got back from an incredible time. I mean, not only did we go to just an overly special place for water feature designers and that. I mean, so we went to John Lautner's office, John Lautner and Associates, and sat down with Helena Arahuete. And, such a warm invitation in there, and then we came into the office, and I was blown away. All of her models for all of her recent projects were there. And we kind of have we sort of have a structure that we set up the mics, we kind of got everything ready, and you and her were already immediately just right into it while we were getting everything set up. And then tell us what happened, because we kind of went off script like immediately.
Immediately, and upon walking into her office, she went right to a model and started describing, because we had mentioned models, because you and I were discussing models on the way up.
Sure.
And when we walked in the door, I said, "Oh, I was just talking to Dave about these models," and she says, "Well, I model everything," and then began to show us the models, and we didn't realize it for 5 or 10 minutes, but the interview had begun.
Yeah.
And and again, but rather than an interview, it was Helena just leading the way and showing us. My job was easy. I just sat back and rode along.
Oh gosh, and just the history and just I was just so honored to just be in the
Me
space
too.
with her. I mean,
Absolutely.
she just commands such respect, and just working alongside such an icon of the industry for so long.
Yeah.
And you can really see how she became a real contemporary of his, and kind of created her own style and everything, and just really kind of has done a wonderful job continuing the name of Lautner and Associates, and then we just started to get into some of the current projects and some of the previous projects, and just it just went everywhere, and I was really surprised. I mean, she just kind of started going, and we just kind of stood back and listened and learned.
Rode the wave, baby.
Yeah.
it was a good time. Again, so much knowledge, so much information, so much pedigree there. That was just incredible. And the works, even, I've been a student of Lautner ever since learning about him back in '93 when Tischerman took me out onto one of his job sites that was a Lautner project while Lautner was still alive, the Goldstein residence, and didn't know who John Lautner was at that first day when I walked in, and David said, "You need to look him up." Mm-hmm. and so I did, and plus being at the Goldstein house, what an iconic, beautiful architectural structure, concrete and glass, man, just doesn't get any better than that. And so it was exciting and Helena was an extreme part of that. She was kind of, I think, do you recall, she was the lead architect there? Yeah. And so she knows it front, inside, out, backwards, upside down. She knows that particular project. So having that person in the room who was as personable but at the same time commanding, as you said, in such a slight package too, I might add. So she was incredible. I'm still jazzed about the opportunity to go spend some time with her in her office.
I know, exactly. And for me, I'm a student of architecture, but not nearly as versed as you are. But for my money, I got to say that as within the water shaping industry, John Lautner is kind of the icon for me. I know, you have Wright, who's kind of the American icon, and then Lautner's in those discussions, as some of the best in the history of American architecture. But when you take it into the water shaping realm, the amount of details that he has innovated, the first vanishing edge pool in the country, putting the Sheets Goldstein house, putting acrylic windows in the bedroom in the early 60s.
Yeah,
I mean, these things were they're just catching on. What are we, 50 years later now?
Well, and that's that amazing one too, the silver top that I had told you about. We didn't really get a chance to cover that today with her, if I recall. But I've actually been in that backyard before at Silvertop, 1957, battered negative edge, so a battered wall with I wanted to say acrylic because we're just so used to
glass.
using acrylic. Glass panel in the edge wall, 1957.
Yeah.
Pool guys, what do you think?
Right, and then in the wall between the bedroom, you look out of the bedroom in Sheets Gold Street, early 60s, 62, 63.
Yeah, 63.
So as far as, so if you don't know who John Lautner is, this is going to be a wonderful program. Stay tuned, and if you do, I just really hope this kind of enhances your respect and just your understanding of what an icon he was and just the legacy that he has left to our industry. So really, you're in for a real treat. Stay tuned for this very special episode of the Ask the Masters podcast. This week's episode is sponsored by Pentair.
So I think that I kind of grew as an architect by being exposed to such fantastic creative jobs, and then I started analyzing and making my own conclusions.
Yeah.
Like this one, and I thought, how can you explain it to people? Because the general public doesn't know much about architecture.
Sure.
Because they just don't get the opportunity to see good architecture. And you cannot send the architecture to a museum like you do paintings or sculptures, right? Mm-hmm. So you actually have to be in the space, and a lot of those buildings are not accessible, to the general public, unless, of course, it's a theater or a church or a temple or whatever.
Yeah, public space.
Yeah,
right.
Right. As you learn and work in this, you begin to understand, and things have, perhaps a slightly different meaning for me than for other people, but I interpret organic in the sense of, the way nature creates. Like, for instance, a mountain or a tree are shaped a certain way because it makes sense. Nature made them, so the trunk is usually heavier, the branches are cantilevered, they're proportionally thinner as they expand. The mountain normally is, wider at the bottom, and you can never say, oh, this mountain is a Victorian mountain, and this tree is a Louis XV tree. No. It is beautiful for what it is. So to me, the master design is like Mother Nature.
Sure.
So what's organic has to do with being inspired in the way nature creates. I mean, you cannot imitate nature and try to design a structure that looks exactly like a tree, for example, but at least understand the concept of how or why, like in every living or not even living thing, basic organisms are such that everything there has a purpose. They work, and every little thing they have serves a purpose for something. Mm-hmm. And usually nature made, they're beautiful, or if
that's
they're
where everybody wants to be.
Ugly, if they're ugly, that serves a purpose too, like to deter predators,
right,
scare enemies, or whatever. But there's a reason much beyond what you'd think of as style. Then people started inventing styles just for the purpose of classifying. They would assign a style to everything, which in fact the word style for John Lautner was a bad word.
Oh, wow.
Because he got really offended if you would ask him, well, Mr. Lautner, I heard people asking, what style of architecture do you do? I don't do style. Because styles to him are appropriate to fashion design, for instance. You know, you change clothes
Sure.
every year, but a building is supposed to last a long time.
Right.
So it has to transcend a style, and usually if it's good, you know, it would last. You know, like cathedrals are timeless. Yeah, you can say Gothic cathedrals, Baroque, or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, right. But if they're good, they're timeless.
Yeah.
So that's what, you know, I try to do. I cannot compare what I do to a cathedral, but in the scale I work, I still think that every building has to be good for the purpose it serves. Argentina, that's where I came from.
Yeah. Could you kind of double back on that though? Go a little further. So you were born in Belgium?
Yeah, I was born in Belgium, but as a toddler. I mean, or actually, I was 4 years old when my parents decided to move to Argentina. So it was just the three of us, my parents and me.
No, you have no siblings.
No siblings.
Oh, interesting.
No,
So
it's a fourth. My daughter is also only child. My father and my grandfather were only children.
So there's something in your genes there somewhere.
I don't know.
It's a one
don't
up.
know.
And even in your work, by the way, one up. That's it. I don't repeat.
Yeah, I try not to repeat. So anyway, as soon as we arrived in Argentina, they put me in a kindergarten, so I would learn Spanish, you know, right away, which I did. And I lived there through university. And my parents moved to the States when I was just starting university.
Okay.
But I wanted very much to study architecture, and universities.
And what was that?
they're-
What got your interest in architecture?
Well, as a child, I loved to draw and sculpt, so my parents saw some talent, you know, for,
Sure.
so maybe I could be an artist later. So I had an art teacher come to the house when I was little, and I loved drawing. Then I started, you know, doing sculptures, but at the same time I was very interested in how things were put together. So I would take mechanical stuff apart. Actually, my father was a mechanical engineer.
Oh.
I had no architects in the family. But I liked working with my hands, building things. I would build little, you know, shelters for the pets, or so hands-on, you know, working with tools. Because if anything broke, my father normally was the one, you know, to fix stuff. And I thought, well, he's out working, he can do it, I can do it. So I would fix whatever broke.
Yeah.
And then I loved putting things together, and also my parents read a lot, constantly. We were going back and forth to the library, and I loved reading books and about history also. You know, history, you learn incredible things. You know, you read as a child Three Musketeers, and then I thought, well, who was this Louis XIII and who was this cardinal? So I would go look it up and then find styles, and then I got interested in history of art.
Okay,
So
all right.
I thought, hey, you know, how can I combine all this? Because I had no clue what's architecture. And finally, well, I read a book by Frank Lloyd Wright, and that inspired me.
I see.
It was on Frank Lloyd Wright, but by an Italian writer called Bruno Zevi, who had an architectural magazine later on. And I thought, well, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do. And then gradually I understood that somewhat contrary to painting, you know, like you have a painting on a wall, it's art.
Yeah.
And then a sculpture, you can walk around the sculpture and look at it from all sides.
Yeah.
But later I understood that good architecture is like you're inside the sculpture.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
And the space and everything that's around you is the art.
Okay.
But so contrary to, say, the sculpture that you view by, seeing it on all
Sure.
sides, now you're inside. And everything around you, is what matters.
So-
and the sense of space. The height, the scale makes you feel something. It's like your body reacts differently if you are in a small, sheltered
Right,
space,
right.
or if you are in a, say, cathedral, or a place with very, very high ceilings. It makes you feel different.
Got it.
And that's what good architecture is meant to do. University for me was extremely important, first of all, because I knew that I could study in Argentina, because the best university is totally state subsidized. I mean, there are private universities, but we perceive them there as, for the rich kids who don't want to work too hard, while the national university with
Yeah.
a campus in Buenos Aires, the capital, is very demanding. The workload is tremendous, but on one hand it's free, unless you fail the subject, then you have to pay. But then it understands the need of students who have to work, and they encourage the working as long as it is in the same field of your studies.
Okay.
So you could choose classes like from 8 to 12 in the morning, or from 8 to midnight at night. But all the lectures started at 6 p.m. So I would be in a full-time job, a construction company,
Yeah.
architectural offices,
Yeah.
all day, full-time.
Yeah.
And then at 6 I was in university.
I see.
And I was learning stuff in school that I was applying every day.
Every day,
Because
yeah.
I would change jobs about every year. So for actually more than a year, I was a structural draftsperson, and we use a lot of concrete, reinforced concrete there.
Okay.
So the first sets of drawings that arrive at the job site are the structural drawings. So these were all high-rises, mostly. So I had to do the drawings and then go to the site and inspect that the rebar was placed correctly.
Yep.
And then at night, I was studying concrete structures in school. So
Yeah.
I had the theory and the experience. Then I had to do a layout for the structural drawings of the plumbing and electrical,
Okay.
because they, excuse me, they had to leave openings to run the ducts and conduits and pipes, so on.
Of course. Yeah.
And then at school, I was studying lighting design, electrical, acoustic, plumbing, heating and air conditioning. So with all that, plus we had art, just pure art, architectural design, and we had like 2 years of math and 4 years of structures. Like 1 year of timber and steel,
Yeah. Yeah.
1 year of all concrete structures, 1 year of specialized structures like thin shells and tensile structures.
Quite comprehensive.
Yeah.
This education.
At the beginning, we need to study surveying, so we were really, really well-rounded. I
And-
owe
and
a lot of my knowledge, what I already knew before I
Yeah.
started with Lautner, to my school, so I always mention it. Besides,
Well,
it was free.
all this work and an application leaves no
And the
time for
application.
Gregory in between. I don't understand.
Yeah, well, he was another reason for me deciding to stay in Argentina, because we got married, and at that time, as young students, you needed a couple to survive. So
Yeah, yeah.
the wages were, one wage was enough just to pay the rent, and the second wage was to live on. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then eventually, well, we both graduated. He went to business school.
Okay.
And my parents, who had become American citizens by then, because it's a very long program, architecture there, they kept insisting, well, why don't you come and spend a year at least or two with us here in the States? I said, well, okay. You know, we never intended to come, but yeah, it's interesting to spend, you know, some time. You know, you work in a foreign country,
Sure,
and you
sure.
go back to your country. Oh, well, you were working in the States. When I arrived here, and I learned of Lautner through an acquaintance of my father, who was actually the owner of the Chemisphere House, this house here in Naples.
Yeah.
He was not really a friend, but they did some consulting work together. Both were engineers. And he told my father that he knows this great architect. And when I heard the name, I remembered Lautner. I had studied John Lautner in school together with Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yep.
That was a time when nobody knew about Lautner here, but in Europe and in South America, he was well known.
Really? In Europe and South America, where he had
Europe,
no work?
No, but they were interested. Same thing happened with Frank Lloyd Wright. I think the first book on Frank Lloyd Wright was published in the Netherlands.
Ah, I
You
didn't
know, when
that.
nobody or hardly, and people did not like. He was different. He was strange. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
So in any case, I went I gave John Lautner a call, and he said, "Oh, come on over."
Ah, that was it. Just a
So
phone
I
call.
show
A cold
up
call.
at the office, and he shows me the first sketches of a house that he was designing in Acapulco.
Ah.
And he needed an architect who would know architectural concrete, the metric system,
Yep,
and the Spanish language.
yep.
Because the structural engineers were in Mexico. So all the drawings had to be in metric and English and Spanish, and by someone who understood concrete structures.
This meeting was
So
meant to
that
be.
was, I qualified for all three, so he hired me. And when I saw the sketches...
Wait, hired you right on the spot, or he thought about it a little bit?
No, he hired me. He said,
Right there.
yeah, because I didn't know how much to... how much should I make? You know, how much money?
Yeah.
So I just told him, well, you don't know me, you don't know how I work. And I was used back in Argentina to be paid at the end of the month. So why don't you just pay me for the first month whatever you want? And I worked for a whole month, and then at the end of the month, if you are happy with my work, I really want to make $4.50 an hour. Which wasn't bad. It wasn't
laughing
bad.
now, but that wasn't laughable
Yeah,
then. I should-
no,
yeah,
that was
wasn't bad.
end of 1971.
Ah,
But just in case, I asked him, well, I mean, he said, fine. So I asked him, well, how much are you going to pay me this first month? And he said, oh, I don't pay anybody more than $3.50 an hour.
oh, oh.
Okay. So then at the end of the month, or actually we were paid bi-weekly, then I get the next check and it's still $3.50. So I go with the check. Excuse me, Mr. Lautner, are you happy with my work? And he said, oh yes, you're doing fine. Okay, well then we have an agreement that if you're happy, you will pay me, $4.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so he changed the check and
Oh, wow. Good for
Yeah.
you, though, huh?
yeah, and I
That
thought,
was confidence
wow.
in a young woman, in yourself.
Yeah, but it wasn't much. Then I realized, hey, how stupid. But I didn't know. I didn't know.
It
know.
wasn't stupid, it worked.
But it worked. It worked. And to me, the stuff that he was designing was like a fairy tale in architecture. I mean, they were creative. We were creative students.
Yeah.
We had very good instructors in university who let us do our own thing. They were not trying to push us to, do work like, say, Le Corbusier or Niemeyer or Mies van der Rohe. No, if they saw that we were, you know, in an interesting direction ourselves, you know, they would let us do that.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, these designs, maybe somebody creative can generate them, but to get them built, and John Lautner actually gets them built. Wow. So this is fantastic.
So did he have a general contractor that he liked and was the go-to guy?
He had a couple of contractors who were the ones who ended up building some of the most interesting work. Mm-hmm. One was Wally Newiadomski, who had done some work for Frank Lloyd Wright. Mm. He was based in Chicago, but at the time Lautner designed the silver top house that had this shell type
was
of
that 1957?
Yeah,
okay.
Right, 56, 57. He called Wally to work on the house, and then Wally stayed. And then there was another one called John Delavaux, who just died last year, end of last year. He was over 100, you know, when he died.
Yeah. Excellent
builder. I was lucky enough to be able to do what I think he would have. You know.
So with this remodel, you were able to bring what you feel John's vision overall.
Or what it would be today, because again, he would not do the same.
Sure.
He would do something better. Because it's interesting, he passed away at the age of 83, but he always had a very young mind. He was interested in the newest technologies, and he wanted to experiment with things. So I would tell him that he really had a mind of a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you know, older people, sometimes they get very set in their ways, and they continue doing the same thing over and over. Well, he was just the opposite. And then he did an incredible thing by giving me this type of recognition. Usually architects or even Frank Lloyd Wright had a big ego, and so it's the architect and the apprentices. You know? For Lautner, in a way, it was often like architect and the draftspeople. But you know, later I worked for him for 23 years because I could not find people who were more creative. And it gave me the opportunity. I could have started on my own earlier. I mean, I was licensed when I started working for him, but not in the States. But I already had quite a bit of experience in the field because I had to work my way through school. I built the model, because it was impossible to communicate this in drawings to the client. So the model was
sure. I draw some too, and it would be hard to draw.
So I just bent cardboard, you know, corrugated cardboard that you can bend and curve. So this is the sloping
this wall, it comes down, these ends
that blocks the view to the neighbor he never wanted to see.
Right.
And it starts on a 2-to-1 slope toward the ocean, and then gradually it becomes vertical, and then it starts leaning in the other direction. So I bent this and I cut it and I put it on the site. First we built the site, you know, I built the site. And then I showed it, you know, to Lautner, well, this would look great, but it would be so hard to build.
Hard to build.
No, let's go. Let's do it. Let's do it. So anyway, I finished building the whole model. We called the owner, the client, and he said he really liked it. So now it's necessary to do drawings. So I sort of invented how to do the drawings. I took the model, which was about this size, maybe narrower, but taller. I took it to a large roof terrace that we had in the old building on Hollywood
Okay.
Boulevard.
Yeah.
And I took 35 millimeter slides, photos.
Oh, photograph the model
Yeah.
up in the full sunlight.
Right, in full sunlight.
Lots of
I
shadows.
plans and all the elevations
Yeah.
with a telephoto lens. So I would
Make it look
minimize
bigger.
the distortion.
Exactly.
No. So it looked as much as an actual elevation as
got it.
possible, not a perspective.
Okay. All right.
Okay?
All right.
So I took all the elevations and the plan, and then went home and projected it by adjusting the projector on a white wall
Okay.
until it was to 1/8 of an inch scale. And
This is brilliant.
taped a piece of paper
Yeah.
on the wall
Yeah.
and went freehand over the image.
I love it. So cool.
The plan and all the elevations. And those became the elevations. Now what I did, since I knew topography also, like
Yeah.
surveyors, especially if you have sloping terrain, they do the contour lines, each contour at say, 1-2 feet intervals.
Right.
So I put it in a grid. This is all before computer.
Sure.
Okay? Before a computer.
Yeah.
I put it in a 3-dimensional grid, like X, Y, and Z. And I had reference points every 50 feet. I went with surveyors to the site, and I had them mark the points, to measure from. Because actually there were 2 grids. And then from the office, I could call Wally Niewiadomski, who was the builder, and tell him, oh, that point is at north,
XY axis, and you got it. Yeah.
East, so much, elevation, such. Okay?
Perfect.
But then for this wall, I had to draw sections.
This one?
Yeah, this one, every 30 inches.
That's
So
the one
for
that
them-
baffles me on this
For
side.
them to build the forms, because
Yeah.
in order just to build the forms, that was tricky, because it varies.
So how
So
far
that's
were the
math.
sections?
That was math that I remember. I figured out an equation
Okay.
of varying, the slope,
Yeah.
and I was able to do all these sections just in 8.5 by 11.
Okay.
Sent them to the site, or take them, because I lived on that site practically.
I would think so.
Yeah,
I would
because
think
it was so one of a kind.
Yeah.
And that's how it built.
So what was the impetus of this, not only this meandering wall, but then the lean this way or the lean that way? What's the impetus? What was the design
Well,
impetus?
because of the inspiration in the ocean as a wave, the
Okay.
terrain was sloping, so the wall was also going like this. And the main part of the house was elevated deliberately, so the view was down to the rocks below, so the waves would break on those rocks, and that was more interesting
I see.
than just
Okay.
the straight view out. It was a challenge.
Could
really.
imagine building that wall, much less designing it.
Everything was
Yeah.
a challenge.
Yeah.
And the owner was really, really excited. See, so this is the shape.
Oh, this is it, yeah.
The ground floor is pretty much the same garden that goes through, and there's a little waterfall that comes down the roof and
Oh,
hits
I got
the
it.
top
Now I
of
see
this
it.
rock.
Oh.
So it brings out the color.
What a
of
great
the-
effect
of
that
the
you're
rock.
dropping water onto the
Right.
rock. And the rock is very, very tall, standing. That
Yeah,
would be
very tall.
stalagmite-like.
And the edge of this pond is all, well, I came up with stacked slate. So it has this very rugged edge,
Yeah.
you see. So this was basically the shape. He needed an 8-car garage because he had collection cars. This is the ground floor, his 8 cars.
Oh, I see the garage. Yeah.
But otherwise, this is all, the landscaping and water going through under the house. And the upper floor is where the main entry is. So you can literally drive on this ramp or walk on it, park the car here under the cover of the roof, and just walk into the house.
You know, we do swimming pool plans every day, and Dave and I both, and we spend a lot of time in this world of looking at plans. I'm looking at a pool, I'm not looking at a house. When I'm looking at these plan
again,
views.
here, Lautner did not want to repeat himself, but the client visited the house in Acapulco, and he insisted on having the railing, we called it the railing pool in Acapulco, that went all the way around the upper floor.
The Arango house.
Yes, in the Arango house in Acapulco. But here he wanted it in his house, and we figured, oh well, you know, it's facing the ocean beyond, so it would have the same infinite space type concept, you know, where the water flows into water beyond.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you don't get to see the ocean at all as you arrive. You start walking on this ramp, and your view is blocked completely, you know, by these walls, the planters. There are skylights, one on top of each one of these cars. So you can see the radiator of the car from outside because it's lit with natural light. And then you enter the house, you open the front door, and then wow, you know, you have the, you see
it brings you
this.
into the experience.
And the interesting thing, I remember being at the site was still open, and people would just walk in and start looking at things, and they would approach me and ask, "Why did you paint all this wood gray?" I said, "No, this is concrete. It's just that it has the texture of the form boards."
Right.
Oh, you know, I thought it looks like wood. Because
within all of that, and you talked about you were on the site quite a bit in directing contractors and helping them. Tell me, is there anything on the water feature that was a bit of a challenge that you needed help with, or did it all go fairly smoothly?
I think it went fairly smoothly at that time.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we had huge pumps, you know, for the waterfall, 10 HP. We had over more than what we needed.
Of course.
So we could graduate, you know, the waterfall. We had the waterfall in different modes.
I see.
It could be just very thin, or it could be kind of a rushing type.
Got it.
And the interesting thing here is the view, you know, from the main living room and the bedroom, and the way the roof is curved, it sort of duplicates the coastline. You know, it's curving this way, and the roof is curving this other way. So the way the views are framed usually make them more interesting as you see them from inside the house than when you're outside. If you're outside, you just see the view, which is a beautiful view.
Of course.
But the way you frame it,
You can frame it.
that makes a big difference too. And again, everything here was set up to be on voice command, on remote, and hardwired. So I had to experiment at the time when nobody was using voice command yet. With the guys who were developing those systems. But I realized that they didn't always work, because I had to give commands, you know, in whoever's garage or who was working on that. And depending on the tone of your voice, it would recognize you, you know, the voice recognition system would work or would not work. So I told, and then there's a problem with the microphones, you know, the range of the miphones.
Of course.
So I told the owner, well, we can set up for this, but don't install it yet until it's more developed.
So that technology, that's why I just noticed the date that this house was, looks like it was produced 79 to 90. Was there a remodel, or what does that mean?
No, first of all, it took about 2.5 years in permits, because the next door neighbor didn't like the idea of having a house there, and this had to go through Coastal Commission, and it was necessary to post a sign at the front of the house announcing the neighborhood that there was going to be a hearing and so on. And the next door neighbor had the sign pulled out. You know, every time we put it in, And then he said
Good
that there
gosh.
was no sign. So we got finally a permit and he had it revoked. So we had to go, the owner had to hire an attorney.
Oh,
And I
good
remember we went to a hearing in San Francisco. The attorney recommended going to a place far away
Yeah.
so the neighbor
Change of
would not
venue.
show up.
Yeah,
there.
right. Yeah, yeah.
So that time we got it. So it took a long time, first in the permits, then the nature of the house itself. It was all built on time and materials because there was no other way.
Of course.
And
How you gonna
because
bid that?
nobody knew how to how to price it. So he was a very trustworthy contractor who we knew for years.
Uh-huh.
And then the owner himself, he wanted, for instance, this was a, I don't know if you can see. In any case, this is 17 feet long, black slab. We could not get, he did not want any seams. And where do you find a slab that's 17 or 18 feet long?
Yeah.
So, well, find it.
Find
So
it. That's how
find
you
it.
do.
So you
That's how you
start
do it. You find
contacting
it.
people from Africa, China, all over.
Yeah.
And
Can you ship us a
finally,
big
I
rock?
found one quarry in Zimbabwe
In Zimbabwe.
that had black granite,
Uh-huh.
and they could cut a slab that size as long as the owner paid for a special blade that could,
Yeah.
you
Well, he
could
said
use.
find it.
But then the cost of the insurance by shipping, because still granite, can be fractured.
Sure.
There are natural fracture
Mhm.
lines, so there's no guarantee
Yeah.
that it will arrive in one piece.
Yeah.
And it was just so expensive that the owner decided that he would accept hairline seams, but I had to get prices from at least half a dozen of granite contractors
Uh-huh.
that would bring samples of how invisible a hairline seam they could accomplish. And then he finally chose. So all this stuff, takes a lot of time
And money.
and money and money. But still, it was relatively about a bargain because he had an accountant on the job site too,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
taking care of ordering or actually making all the payments.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to do some construction management as well, in the sense of approving all the subs
Yeah.
bills
Yeah.
and checking that the work was done well and so on. But Wally, the builder, was just fantastic. He lived there. He just moved a trailer. He and his wife were living at the site.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. So nothing except the actual structure was touching the roof, because otherwise it would look like another support. See, this column
I see.
and the,
Yeah.
and the sloping wall was all. Everything else stayed short of the roof, to the extreme that there was a duct. I mean, because this was solar heated also.
Oh.
Custom solar panels.
Custom solar panels. Wow.
Right,
Wow.
with heat exchangers on the roof that brought the air down into the floor.
Mhm.
And the floor was like 3 feet deep here, 5 feet here. So the air, it was radiant air running through the floor.
Through the floors.
Through the floors.
Mhm.
And the duct that brought the air from the solar collector down into this space was glass. The upper part was glass.
Glass
it-
duct.
Yes. The visible, I mean the section that touched the roof,
Uh-huh.
which was about 4 feet short of the roof,
Okay.
was a glass duct. Because if it was solid, it would have looked like a column
You'd
or a
see it,
pier
yeah.
supporting the roof.
So, well,
So everything was like the ultimate.
we love the water there, and given the fact that one of our founders helped John Lautner in the remodel of this, David Tischerman.
Yeah, Dave Tischerman, we worked together with him
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
Because this house, again, is in constant construction.
Mm.
The original owners sold it, I think, in the very early 70s.
Mm-hmm. Is that where the
And
Sheets name came from?
the
I know the
Sheets,
Goldstein,
yeah,
but I don't know
right.
Sheets. So.
No, no.
I actually met Jim Goldstein. I was fortunate enough to be kind of tutoring under David Tischerman in the early 90s, and I was on this site several times throughout that process and got to meet Mr. Goldstein.
Well, this was a challenge because what we did with him was to upgrade the existing swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
And when you remodel a traditional swimming pool and change it into an infinity edge,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot harder to do than when you design that
From
from
scratch. Yeah, exactly.
So I remember I worked with Dave on that, designed a stainless steel edge.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that you and he had a relationship then. So.
Oh, yes. We worked
Yeah.
very closely. Because just about everybody who worked for John Lautner at one time or another worked in the Goldstein house, because it went on forever. And when people would ask the owner, "Oh, Mr. Goldstein, when are you going to finish the construction?" he would just smile and say, "Never." Because that's his life occupation,
Yeah.
pretty much.
So
So I got to do the entry in this pond,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which used to be just a regular fish pond in the dirt.
Oh, okay.
So it was upgraded like a main entrance to the house, and also this waterfall. And the problem was at that time, and it was actually, this was done before I met Dave Tischerman,
Mm-hmm.
there were no consultants who would tell you exactly what shape of the weir to get this type of flow. So I remember a guy who used to work in the office, Duncan,
Mm-hmm.
and myself. Well, we made a strip of plywood. And
You made a model.
Yeah, full size
Yeah.
of a section, of course,
Okay.
standing in the water, holding up this
What
this
a good
strip of
architect would
plywood
do.
about the, and changing the amount of flow
Yeah.
until we decided, well, this is the angle
it,
that we
yeah.
need. So it was
Who
all
needs math?
experimental. Then I had another idea that I could never accomplish.
Uh-huh.
In the landscaping, there is a path that goes down his property, and he wanted a water feature. So I thought, well, it would be great to have something sort of like, not exactly a waterfall, but a nozzle that would describe an arc like this.
Mm-hmm.
So you could walk under it.
Ah, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so you're walking there and you have from the hill, because it was
Sure.
very steep, this nozzle with the water. But no consultant was available to tell me that he could actually control that in such a fashion that the person...
Without wetting the people.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
That was before they came up,
Yeah.
the guys from Canada.
The laminar flow.
Right,
Yeah.
the laminar flow.
Yeah.
So that project was abandoned.
Yeah.
So there were things that we could have done then that there were no consultants. So I was very much aware of the need of having people like in between, say, the architect, who's not an expert in water feature design,
Right.
and the contractor,
Yeah.
who just normally keeps doing the same thing that his own experience taught him.
Mhm.
So we needed this other entity
Yeah.
in between the water feature designer.
Yeah.
So
That's kind of where we
that's how
came in.
we connected.
Yeah, that's how
Right.
you and Tischerman connected.
Probably through David.
So, well, back up a bit. So, who came up with the idea of flushing out the water with the concrete deck? Because it's done very common today, but back then, just in the early '90s, nobody was doing that.
Well, I had to invent something.
That was you.
Yeah, because it was a remodel.
Mm.
It was a traditional pool, with the water line maybe 5 inches below the edge.
Uh-huh.
And the owner, Jim Goldstein, happened to travel to Thailand, and he stayed in a hotel in Thailand that had this feature of the infinity edge, and he wanted to convert his pool to an infinity edge.
Of course, yeah.
So then, how do you do that?
Yeah,
And
when
the-
you're surrounded,
and
you're
then
landlocked.
besides, I knew that the edge, the existing edge, was not perfectly level. But of course, if you have this 4 or 5 inches to play with, you don't even notice if it's ½ inch off. But with the water line, that doesn't
Can't
lie.
cheat that.
Has to be absolutely perfect. So I
Yeah.
thought the only way would be to add on, make the pool smaller and add on a stainless edge.
On the way up, talking about that particular detail, and I remember how it was done, and the stainless steel gutter that would sit on top of the pool beam, and that little nozzle piece that came up that the water falls into. So I
Right,
remember
and then
that
it
well.
has to be thin.
Yeah, and thin, exactly. And the other trick that I've never done in my career, and I've never seen it done since, is the face of that stainless steel. There's that intersection that meets to the gunite wall or concrete wall below. That's plastered all the way up. It is a PebbleTech plaster, if I remember correctly.
Yes, we
So they
use
had to
PebbleTech.
bond not only to the cement, which is designed to do the cementitious material bonding to another, but then bonding that to a stainless element that was a challenge. But he pulled it off, if I remember correctly. And there was one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and it shows a better photograph of it there, but can you tell me about the sink in the master bedroom?
Oh
I remember
yes,
seeing
that was a John Lautner
That was a lot of
idea.
detail.
This used to be a storage room. The lower floor was just a storage room.
Uh-huh.
And the owner decided he wanted to convert it to the master bedroom. And a master bath, of course, where all the glass was done beautifully. But he wanted to see the view because you can see all the way to the ocean
Yep.
on a clear
Yep.
day. And at the same time, be able to shave in front of a mirror. But he did not want the mirror or the sink to block the view. So he asked Lautner, how can we do that? Simple, a glass sink.
Okay.
And the mirror would retract. So you could swivel the mirror. At that time, a great guy called, an Australian, called Andrew Nolan was working on it. Here you have a very good picture of it, see?
Yeah.
The glass sink, and this is the faucet, basically.
Yeah, it's a stainless bar, right?
Yeah, waterfall, that type, that was again before it became a fad. So the water just rolls down the glass, and here it goes outside, it rolls under. The glass was treated, so
Yeah.
the water would just slide off.
I'm remembering it now better.
And this is the swivel type mirror,
For the
so
mirror.
you could just bend it against the
Yeah.
wall.
Amazing stuff. That was just an absolutely incredible house.
Oh, still is, and he kept adding. After Lautner passed away, we had a
during one of the
couple-
remodels of the house, he passed away, correct? I mean, I was there in '93.
In 94 he passed away.
Yeah.
But he was ill for the last few years of his life. He had it was called neuropathy that affected the nerves going to both legs. So he couldn't walk anymore. He was
Oh, wow.
confined to a wheelchair. That was
No fun.
really terrible. He felt miserable on account of that. Otherwise, he was a very healthy man all his life. But then I continued after he passed away a couple of existing projects that the client, was running them, and clients trusted me. I mean, they knew me for ages.
Yeah.
When he published his book, a few months before he passed away, he wrote in the book, among other people, to whom he dedicated the book, he wrote to Helena Arahuete, who was, the chief architect in my office for over 20 years.
Helena, thank you again so much for,
Okay, well,
for the entire time that you spent with us. It was,
all right.
again, a pleasure. Welcoming us into your home is just outstanding. Thank you.
I want to kind of get into more of the pumps, the variable speed pumps, variable flow pumps. When they first came out, I think it was like 2005 or 2006. They were like it was a huge leap in pump technology. I know other industries had it around for a little bit before the pool industry, before you guys got into it. But you guys were the first ones that came out with it. And I think that really just changed the whole dynamic of energy efficiency. So the great thing about the variable speed pumps is you can do multiple things with the same pump. So kind of get into that. What do most people use those variable speed pumps for? I use them on everything, whether it's my main filtration pump or water feature pumps. I rarely ever buy a single speed pump anymore.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Those are you have a lot of good questions there. So the variable speed flow pump technology, which started back in 2005, the whole idea behind it at the time was that when they would have a pool and a spa, they would always, on that spa, sometimes it was a single pump system. So we had to have 2 horsepower pumps running 7 days a week just to filter,
Right.
to wait for the homeowner to come home and use the spa. So that's a huge energy kill on the system, because it's going to eat up a lot of energy at a 2 horsepower pump just for filtering, when all we need is about 32 to 35 gallons a minute. If this
Right.
vessel is hydraulically plumbed well.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
And that's a big if.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it used to
Right.
be all 1.5 inches, and
Right.
to get the industry to go to 2 was a big chore, and
Right.
now we want 2.5 and 3.
Right.
So and the nice thing about the variable speed pumps are variable speed flow. The whole vessel's based on flow. The cleaners are based on how much flow is going to go in order for it to operate. The same for the skimmers. We want X amount of flow across the weir of that skimmer to pull all of the surface dirt off of the vessel, so that the cleaner doesn't have to work as hard below the water level.
Right.
So that the pumps made a big difference, that we were able to set the gallons per minute, or the RPMs, to facilitate how well that vessel is going to be operated at.
Right.
So when you look at every motor in the swimming pool business, whether it's a 0.5 horsepower or all the way up to a 3 horsepower, is 3,450 RPMs. Every motor is the same.
Yeah, the great thing about the efficiency of those variable, speed pumps and the variable flow pumps is that you can get that sweet spot, on the variable speed, where I do a lot of water and transit things, whether they're like overflows or negative edges, or just like if I'm doing a fountain that really needs to have a unique speed on it. With the plumbing sizes that I do. Now you mentioned something about 2.5 and 3 inch. I like anything. I don't like anything less than 3 inch. I do a lot of 4 inch and 6 inch. So I love to play around with it when I start up, a pool. Like we have a lot of water and transit, like overflow edges, and I just love to sit there and play with that pump a little bit and just dial down that perfect speed to make the water, flow over, on all sides at the lowest possible speed, for the most efficiency. I get a real thrill when I see the wattage, that's being used, and it's like, oh well, this is no more than a lamp, inside the house. So
Absolutely. I tell you that pump is a game changer all the way through. Given that every vessel that's ever been built and will be built in the future, that it's a snowflake. I mean, it's as different as a snowflake in the plumbing as anything could be out there. And that pump can adapt to whatever it needs to be. So that means you can change those gallons per minute to facilitate whatever that event needs to on how that event needs to look. So especially with IntelliCenter now and a new digital valve operator, it allows us to set up with one pump multiple speeds or flows that will facilitate that look of different water features and bubblers or vanishing edge, all with the push of a button, that the analytics are built into it, that when you push that button, it automatically facilitates that to happen. And with the flow, especially with the flow, that if you say you have to have 40 gallons a minute, as the filter gets dirtier and dirtier, it will increase the RPMs to make sure that the flow stays consistent.
Right, and that's a great thing, especially for consumers that sometimes take care of their own pools, or even some guys that don't really clean the filter as much as they should.
Yes.
You know, that works out really well to keep up that maintain under that flow. So, you know, the great thing I also like about the variable speed pump is you guys have come out with like smaller models of them, so they don't always have to be like 220 gallons a minute or 160 gallons a minute. You know, like with the I1 pump, it's 120 gallons a minute. So if you have an older pool that, you know, had that 1.5 inch plumbing on it, you can actually buy that I1 and actually find that sweet spot, you know, to where the hydraulics will actually work better because you're able to put a pump on that more matchly sizes the size of the hydraulics. And, you know, that's a lot with the safety factors too, because, you know, unfortunately line velocity, if you have a big pump on there, like the 2 horsepower pumps that we all used to put on, you know, prior to the variable speeds coming out, you know, that line velocity was pretty incredible on a 2-inch line if you're putting a 2-horse whisper flow on there. So we're able to really get more safe in that we can, you know, we can find that sweet spot and that speed and lock it in, you know, so our main drains, you know, especially on older pools that don't get renovated, so our main drains are safer, and our line velocities, we can slow those way down. So,
And under new construction, when you really need massive amount of water flow, you got the XF.